Everyone in this town used to say I was lucky. "Mrs. Sullivan, you are so blessed," they'd say, "to have a son who's a doctor, and one so dedicated to caring for his own mother." Yes, Ryan, my son, took care of my every need. He personally brought me my medicine, controlled my food, and gently isolated me from my friends out of concern for my health. Everyone saw a devoted son. What I tasted was a strange, metallic flavor in my mouth. What I felt were hands that trembled uncontrollably. What I saw was my own hair falling out in clumps. They called it old age. They diagnosed me with dementia, but I knew the truth. This wasn't sickness. This was a murder happening in slow motion. And the killer was the pride of my entire life. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because some truths need to be spread, even if they shake your faith. Some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. That night, the night of the violent tremors I told you about at the beginning, was the turning point. As I lay there, staring at the silvery liquid seeping from the broken vial on the floor, the chemistry teacher in me finally overruled the mother. That mesmerizing sheen wasn't medicine. It was mercury, and the realization hit me harder than any physical blow. It wasn't dementia. It was poisoning. Methodical, calculated, criminal. And there was only one person with the access and the motive to do this. My son, Dr. Ryan Sullivan. It all started about a year ago. First, it was little things that anyone would blame on old age. I'd forget where I put my glasses. I'd drop a cup here, spill another there. I'd mess up the seasoning in the food me, who always had a perfect hand for salt. But soon, things got scarier. I forgot to go to an important birthday party. I got lost walking home from church, on a street I've known since I was a girl. I left a pot on the stove until it boiled dry and almost burned the house down. I would tremble sometimes for no reason, especially in the morning. Worried, Ryan started taking me to doctors. They all reached the same conclusion. The start of senile dementia, a senior moment, natural deterioration. You wonder why none of them saw it? Oh, it's quite simple. Ryan was a respected geriatric specialist. I was just the old woman. They weren't examining me. They were simply confirming his diagnosis. One of them even said I had galloping Alzheimer's. My son, so attentive, decided to take the reins. "Mom, you can't be alone anymore. You need special care. I'm going to personally manage your medications, your food, everything." And so it began. Ryan would bring the medications already separated into little plastic containers with colored labels. "This one is for the tremor. This one is for your memory. This one is to help you sleep better." He came to the house every day, sometimes twice. He brought a young woman to help, Alice, a quiet nurse, who always looked at me with a pity that got on my nerves. My food started arriving ready-made in plastic containers that he brought himself or had delivered. Even my water, I could only drink from the special jug he left in the refrigerator. I felt like a child, but at the same time, so grateful to have such a dedicated son. People in town would say, "You are so blessed, Mrs. Sullivan, to have such a good doctor taking care of his own mother like that." And I, fool that I was, believed it was luck, when in reality, it was death knocking softly on the door, with my own son's hand on the knocker. The symptoms only got worse. My legs became so wobbly I could barely stand for very long. The tremor in my hands meant I couldn't hold a coffee mug without spilling. My memory came and went like a streetlight on a stormy night. Some days I woke up as clear as spring water. Other days, I barely knew what day it was. My hair, which had always been my pride, started falling out in clumps. My teeth, strong my whole life, even without the luxury of expensive dentistry, started to loosen. But the worst part was the feeling of losing control of my own mind, of turning into someone else. "It's the natural process, Mom," Ryan would say in that calm, medical voice. "Old age comes for everyone. You have to accept your limitations." And he'd give me more pills, always more. If I questioned him, he'd cut me off. "Did you study medicine, Mom?" "No, chemistry. Let me handle this. Trust me." I became isolated without even realizing it. Ryan said it was better if I didn't tire myself out with visitors. My friends from church, who I used to pray the rosary with every week, stopped coming because he said I got agitated afterward. The former students who always stopped by for coffee and a chat were informed that I didn't recognize people well anymore, and it made me nervous. The landline was disconnected because, according to him, I was calling people in the middle of the night without realizing it. That's how the poison works most effectively. Isolation. It cuts you off from all help, from every sane voice. It leaves the victim alone with their tormentor. And the only voice left to hear is the one telling you that you're going mad. The world closed in around me, like floodwater rising up the walls. I only saw Ryan, the silent nurse, and occasionally the cleaning lady who came to clean the house, a new girl he had hired himself, because Betty, who had cleaned my house for 20 years, was supposedly stealing things, something I never believed for a second. It was around this time I started having strange dreams, too vivid, of old classrooms, laboratories, chemical experiments. I'd wake up sweating, with fragments of formulas and reactions in my head. It was as if my subconscious was trying to warn me of something my conscious mind, numbed by the pills, couldn't see. Until one day, cleaning out some old junk in the storage room, I found an old box with my teaching notebooks. They were bound in faded blue paper, filled with my small, neat handwriting, which I could barely manage now because of the tremors. I sat right there on the dusty floor and started flipping through, lost in memories. It was in one of those notebooks, yellowed by time, that I found my notes on heavy metals and their effects on the human body. It was material from a special lecture I used to give the seniors about toxicology. It talked about arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury. I read my own handwriting, describing the symptoms: progressive tremors, coordination problems, memory loss, a metallic taste in the mouth, hair loss, dental problems. It was like I was reading a medical report of what was happening to me. Knowledge is a peculiar thing. You carry it for decades, thinking it's merely to educate others. You never imagine that one day, those same dusty notes will be the only thing that pulls you back from the brink of death and insanity. But the most chilling part was when I turned the page and saw a diagram I had drawn myself, showing how mercury could be absorbed by the body through the skin, inhalation, and, dear God, ingestion. Underneath, in red ink, I had written, "Mercury poisoning is particularly dangerous because it mimics natural degenerative diseases, especially in the elderly." It was as if a bell had gone off inside my head. For the first time in months, I felt a terrifying clarity. What if it wasn't dementia? What if it was poisoning? And what if someone was deliberately giving me mercury? But who would do such a barbaric thing? The answer was right in front of me, so obvious it hurt more than the tremors. The only person who controlled absolutely everything that entered my body for the last few months. Ryan, my son, my only son. At first, the idea seemed crazy, the delusion of an already affected mind. What motive would he have? He was a successful, respected doctor with his own clinic. He had money, prestige, and was engaged to the mayor's daughter, with a wedding planned for the end of the year. What would he gain from the slow death of his own mother? I put the notebooks back in the box, but I started paying closer attention to everything. I'd pretend to take the pills, but spit some out when no one was looking. I managed to save samples of the contents of the vials, hiding them in a place only I knew, between the pages of an old Bible nobody ever touched. I tried to stay more lucid, more aware of the details around me. One day, when Ryan thought I was napping after lunch, I heard him talking on the phone on the porch. "I can't wait any longer, Ashley," he was saying to his fiancée. "The old woman problem." Those words echoed in my mind, colder than any winter wind. In that instant, I was no longer his mom. I was just a problem to be solved, a line item on an insurance policy. That was the moment I truly understood I had lost my son, long before the poison ever touched my lips. In that moment, I understood everything. The money. It's always the damned money. I wasn't rich, but I had enough to be considered comfortable, as they say here in the Midwest. My own house, large and well-located downtown, inherited from my husband. A reasonable savings account, built up over decades of hard work and simple living. A piece of land on the riverbanks that had become very valuable in recent years with the growth of tourism. And apparently, a life insurance policy I didn't even know I had, probably taken out by him in my name, forging my signature. For a man drowning in gambling debts and failed investments, desperate to keep up the appearance of a successful doctor, dating the daughter of a politician with his own ambitions of entering politics, his elderly mother, with her modest but significant resources, was worth more dead than alive. That night, the night of the violent tremors and the broken vial with the silvery liquid, was when all the pieces came together. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't an old woman's delusion. It was the naked, raw truth, shining sinisterly on my bedroom floor, like the spilled mercury. My son was killing me slowly, methodically, using his medical knowledge to simulate dementia while poisoning me day after day. And the worst part was, it was working. Despite my suspicions in recent weeks, my body was too weak. The mercury had already accumulated to dangerous levels. The doctors, all his friends, had already given the verdict of irreversible dementia, committing me to a specialized clinic, which I now suspected was just a warehouse for the elderly to die out of sight, was a matter of days. If I said anything, who would believe me? A confused old woman, diagnosed with dementia, accusing her own son, a respected doctor, of attempted murder. I would be seen as even crazier, there, lying in the dark after cleaning up the spilled mercury as best I could, using techniques I taught for decades for handling hazardous substances. I made a decision. If I was going to survive this, I would have to use what was left of my mind, my knowledge, my experience. I couldn't trust anyone openly. I had to be smarter than my tormentor. I needed a plan, and as the tremors finally subsided and exhaustion pulled me towards sleep, a certainty formed in my mind. The chemistry teacher I had been my whole life needed to wake up and take action. It was a race against time, against the poison already circulating in my blood, against a son who had turned into a killer, a race for survival. That night, looking at the silvery liquid shining on the dark floor, the chemistry teacher inside me woke up after all these years, and I understood that I was being poisoned by my own son. But there, before I go straight to the end, I have to start this story at the very beginning of my life so you can understand how I ended up in that situation and, more importantly, how I managed to survive. You only understand the present when you know the past, as my late mother used to say. And my past, my friend, has more curves than the Mississippi River, snaking through these Midwestern lands. I was born in Hannibal in 1949, when the Mississippi still ran clean and generous, without all the dams and pollution it has today. My father, Frank Reed, was a fisherman, one of those men of few words and many calluses, who knew the river like the back of his hand and knew where every fish hid. My mother, Helen, was a seamstress and sold pies she baked, always fighting to give her 4 children a little more. I was the youngest, the only girl, and for that very reason, the one who caused the most trouble. Always asking why, meddling with things I shouldn't, wanting to understand how the world worked. Our house was a simple shack in the lower part of town, the kind that when the river flooded, we had to leave in a hurry with our bundles on our heads. There were no luxuries, but we never lacked food on the plate or love. Since I was tiny, maybe 5 or 6, I was fascinated by how things changed. I watched my mother transform flour, eggs, and sugar into a fluffy cake, water and soap into foam, fire and wood into embers, and I would just sit there puzzling over how it happened. What was that mystery? One day, I must have been about 8, I saw something that changed my life. I was playing on the riverbank while my mother did laundry and found a piece of shiny metal buried in the sand. I took it to my father, thinking I'd found a treasure. He laughed, took the metal carefully, and said, "That's mercury, girl. The old prospectors used it to separate gold." He put it in the palm of his hand and showed me how that silvery liquid moved on its own, splitting into perfect little balls and joining back together. It looked like magic. "Don't put it in your mouth, and don't leave it on your skin too long. It's bad for you," he warned. That warning, instead of scaring me off, only fueled my curiosity. What kind of thing could be so beautiful and, at the same time, dangerous? How could something be both metal and liquid? It was a mystery I wanted to solve. That was my first chemistry lesson, without even knowing that's what it was. Years later, when I taught about mercury in the classroom, I always remembered that moment. Who would have thought that same fascinating metal would one day be used against me? Around age 9, I had my first real contact with science. A teacher named Mr. Walter Hayes, who traveled through rural Missouri teaching in remote places, showed up in Hannibal. He was a tall, thin man with thick glasses and thinning hair, who carried a small, traveling laboratory in an old leather suitcase, test tubes, chemicals, a simple microscope. He set up a makeshift school in the church hall and began teaching science to the local children. My father didn't want me to go. Why does a girl need to learn those things? Go help your mother with the laundry. That's more useful. But I begged so much, cried so much, that he finally gave in, more to get rid of my pestering than because he believed I should study. The first day I saw Mr. Hayes mix one liquid with another, and the solution change color as if by magic, I knew that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. When the teacher left, 2 months later, I was a different person. I had learned that the world was made of atoms and molecules, that matter transformed according to laws that could be understood and predicted, that there was an order to the apparent chaos of nature. I left that makeshift school with a thirst for knowledge that never faded. But studying in rural Missouri in the 1,950 seconds, as a poor girl, was almost impossible. The only school that taught beyond the primary grades was 5 miles from our house, on the other side of the river. Every day, I woke up before sunrise, helped my mother with chores, and then walked that long way, barefoot on the hot dirt, to get to school. On the way back, it was often dark, and I'd be scared of the haints people said appeared on the road. But not even ghosts could stop me from studying. We had no electricity at home. I studied by the light of a kerosene lamp, which made my eyes burn and singed the pages of my notebook from time to time when sleep caught me off guard. My brothers teased me, "Why study so much? You'll end up just like everyone else here, marrying young and having a bunch of kids." Even my mother, who supported me more than my father, sometimes had doubts. "Daughter, don't get your hopes up too high. People like us don't get far in school." But I had seen another world through Mr. Hayes' explanations, and I couldn't be content with what was within my reach anymore. I wanted more, much more, and it was in wanting more that I met the person who would change my life forever, Miss Catherine Price. I was 14 when Catherine arrived in Hannibal. She was a woman in her early 32s, from Street Louis, with a chemistry degree from Mizzou, which, to us back then, sounded as impressive as saying she'd come from the moon. She wore pants instead of skirts, a scandal. She drove her own Ford Bronco, smoked cigarettes with a holder, and spoke looking everyone in the eye, even the important men in town. She had been sent by the state government to improve science education in rural areas and chose Hannibal as her base. The first day of her class, I was mesmerized. Not just by what she taught, chemical reactions, properties of elements, the structure of matter, but by how she taught, with passion, with precision, asking questions instead of just dumping knowledge. At the end of class, when everyone else had left, I stayed behind and worked up the courage to ask a question about something I hadn't understood. Instead of giving me the answer, she asked me more questions, leading me to think for myself. When I finally reached the answer on my own, she smiled. "That's it. Never accept an explanation just because someone important said it. Verify it for yourself." I think it was that day Catherine saw something in me. She started lending me books, giving me extra exercises, inviting me to help her prepare lab experiments. After regular classes, we'd sometimes stay late in the small lab she had set up at the school, mixing substances, observing reactions, discussing results. For a poor girl from the countryside, it was like entering a magical world. One day, after watching me solve a particularly difficult problem, Catherine looked at me with those piercing eyes and said, "Margaret, you have a gift for science. It would be a crime against humanity if you didn't develop that talent." It was the first time in my life anyone had said I was good at something, that I had a gift, that I could be more than just a fisherman's daughter, a laundress, or a housewife. It was Catherine who taught me the most important lesson of my life, the one that would end up saving me decades later. Meticulous observation and detailed documentation are the basis of all true knowledge. Science lives in the details. She always said, "It's not enough to see. You have to observe. It's not enough to remember. You have to record. It's not enough to believe. You have to verify." For my 16th birthday, she gave me the object that would become my companion for life. A hardcover notebook with gridded pages. On the first page, she wrote, "For Margaret, who has eyes that truly see, use these pages to record your observations of the world. One day, they might change that very world. With affection, Catherine." That was the first of many notebooks I would fill throughout my life, with precise notes, detailed observations, chemical formulas, drawings of molecular structures, a habit I started with simple school lab experiments, and that, ironically, would one day be the difference between life and death. The difference between life and death. She says it herself. And that's the absolute truth. That notebook, that simple habit of observing and recording, is the one thing her son will never see coming. She thinks she's just recording experiments, but she's actually forging her only weapon. When I finished high school, Catherine called my parents for a serious talk. She said I had the potential to be a scientist, that I needed to keep studying, that there were scholarships available in St. Louis for exceptional students from rural areas. My father laughed in her face. "A scientist? A girl from the river? You're dreaming too big, ma'am." But Catherine was stubborn. Against all odds, she convinced my parents to let me take the entrance exams for a technical college in St. Louis. I studied like a woman possessed, sleeping only 4 hours a night for months. When the results came out, I had not only passed but had scored among the top 10 inches the state. The scholarship covered tuition and part of my housing, but not everything. My family, despite their hardship, scraped together every penny to send me to the city. I moved to St. Louis at 17, with a bundle of clothes, my notebooks, and more fear than courage. I lived in a cheap boarding house. I ate as little as possible to save money. I worked in the mornings as a janitor in one of the school's labs, which turned out to be a blessing, as I could use the equipment after hours. I studied in the afternoon and at night. Those were hard years, full of sacrifice, but every new discovery, every successful experiment, every formula that finally made sense, compensated for all the difficulties. After the technical program, I managed to get into the chemistry department at Mizzou. It was a huge culture shock. Me, a simple girl from the countryside, with a heavy accent, mended clothes, studying alongside young men and women from the city who had traveled abroad, who spoke other languages, who had never had to worry about what they'd eat the next day. But the moment I stepped into the lab, those differences disappeared. There, what mattered was knowledge, precision, the ability to observe and analyze. And in that, thanks to Catherine, I was second to none. I graduated with distinction in 1972. People offered me jobs in big companies, in labs in the city, even a chance for a master's degree abroad. But my heart belonged to Hannibal. I wanted to go back, to teach, to show the young people there, especially the girls, that it was possible to dream bigger, to go further. I wanted to be for them what Catherine had been for me. I returned to my city as the first science teacher with a university degree. The reception was mixed. Some saw me with admiration. The poor girl who left, studied, and came back a doctor. Others with suspicion. What does this single woman think she's doing? Trying to teach complicated things to kids who just need to learn the basics to work in the fields or on the river. I set up a modest lab in the municipal school, using much of my own salary. Since I didn't have money for expensive equipment, I developed a teaching method based on what was locally available. I used local plants to teach about acids and bases, minerals from the river to talk about chemical composition, cooking processes to demonstrate transformations of matter. Instead of just transmitting information, I encouraged students to observe the world around them with scientific eyes, to ask questions, to seek answers on their own. It was during this time that I began to specialize in toxicology, particularly in heavy metals. It wasn't a random choice. Mining along the Mississippi and its tributaries was in full swing, and I saw the effects of mercury contamination firsthand. Fishermen with unexplained tremors, children with neurological problems, animals dying mysteriously. I started to study, to test the water, to document cases. I gave lectures in the riverside communities about the dangers of mercury and other metals. I taught safe techniques for handling toxic substances. I warned about the symptoms of poisoning. Ironic, isn't it? I spent decades of my life studying and teaching about the dangers of mercury, only to become a victim of it at the hands of my own son. But I didn't have a son back then. I was single, completely dedicated to teaching and research, with little time or interest in relationships. The townspeople had already labeled me a spinster, and I didn't care one bit. I was happy with my students, my experiments, my notebooks. Until, at 38, I met David Sullivan. He arrived in Hannibal as the new doctor at the health clinic, coming from Chicago. A serious, quiet man, also middle-aged, a widower, with no children. We started meeting because of my work with the victims of heavy metal contamination. I would identify suspected cases. He would make the official diagnoses and treatments. Gradually, the professional meetings turned into dinners, the dinners into walks, the walks into a relationship that took me completely by surprise. We got married after a year of dating. It wasn't a marriage of overwhelming passion. I think we were past that age, but one of companionship, mutual respect, and shared goals. He understood my dedication to science and teaching. I respected his medical calling. We had stimulating conversations about the boundaries between chemistry and medicine, about how to improve public health in the region, about the challenges of educating and caring for an underserved population. Soon after the wedding, we started trying to have a child. I thought it would be easy, despite my age. My mother had 4 children without any effort. My sisters were also as fertile as the river valley. But the months went by, then years, and nothing. We did tests, treatments, tried medications, and even some folk remedies that the old women in town recommended. In desperation, the scientist gives way to the woman raised in folk culture. When we had practically given up, the miracle happened. At 42, I got pregnant. It was a high-risk pregnancy, with almost total bed rest in the last few months, but it was worth every minute of worry. Ryan was born healthy, perfect, the most beautiful baby these lands had ever seen, at least to my dazzled mother's eyes. Being an only child, arriving after so much waiting at an age when many women are already grandmothers, Ryan received all the love we had stored up during years of frustrated attempts. David was a devoted father. I was an overprotective mother to the extreme. Maybe we overdid it with the attention, the care, the praise. Maybe we created the root of the problem without realizing it, by making our son believe he was special, that the world owed him something, that everything should come easily. I don't know. To this day, I wonder where we went wrong. At what point the sweet boy we raised began to transform into the monster who would try to kill me decades later. When Ryan was 12, tragedy struck our home. David was returning from a house call in a distant rural community when his car veered off the road and rolled several times down an embankment. He died instantly, alone on that dirt road, with no chance of help. My world collapsed. Not only had I lost my companion, my life partner, but now I was a 4-year-old widow with a preteen son to raise alone. It was the hardest period of my life up to that point. Ryan, devastated by the loss of his father, became rebellious, a problem at school, distant at home. I divided myself between the job I couldn't quit. It was our only source of income, and the attempts to be both mother and father to a boy who seemed to blame me for David's death, as if I had any power over life's accidents. Even with all the financial difficulties after David's death, I made sure to provide the best possible education for Ryan. I gave extra classes, did consulting work for local businesses, saved on everything I could, often skipping meals, wearing mended clothes, postponing my own medical treatments, all to pay for private school, books, extracurricular activities. I wanted him to have all the opportunities I had to fight so hard to get. Ryan was smart, extremely smart. He had an impressive aptitude for the sciences, especially biology. From an early age, he showed an interest in medicine, perhaps influenced by the father he barely got to know. When he told me, at 15, that he wanted to be a doctor, I felt a mixture of pride and nostalgia. "You'll heal the human body," I told him. While I've always taught how to understand matter, it seemed like a perfect continuation, an indirect tribute to his father, a promising future. When it was time for college applications, Ryan got into several universities, including the University of Chicago. It was too big a dream to deny, even knowing the costs would be astronomical for a public school teacher from rural Missouri. I sold the only piece of land we had as a nest egg, his father's inheritance, to guarantee the start of his studies. For the rest, I worked more and more. I borrowed from friends. I did the impossible and the unthinkable, so my son could become a doctor at one of the best universities in the country. During the 8 years of college and medical school, Ryan came to Hannibal less and less. At first, it was entire vacations, then just a few weeks. Finally, whirlwind visits of just a few days. I understood. The big city offered so many more opportunities, entertainment, connections. But I missed him, the boy I had raised with so much love. On the rare occasions he did visit, I noticed small changes that unsettled me. The more artificial way of speaking, mimicking the Chicago accent, the expensive clothes that didn't match the modest allowance I managed to send, the disdainful comments about the simplicity of our town, our house, our life. It was like that for me. The signs were all there, ever since college. The exaggerated ambition, not the healthy desire to grow, but that sick obsession with status and wealth. The emotional coldness that was developing, the ability to talk about terminal patients as cases, not as suffering people. The fixation on expensive brands, luxury cars, influential social circles, little lies he told, increasingly elaborate, about his important contacts in Chicago, about exclusive investment opportunities, about rich patients who adored him. I saw all this, and a small voice inside me sounded the alarm. But another, much louder voice said, "He's your son. Of course, he wouldn't do anything wrong. It's just the enthusiasm of youth, the natural desire to get ahead in life." And so I ignored the signs, stifled the intuition, believed the excuses, the justifications, the mask of the dedicated son he still wore when it suited him. When Ryan graduated, he decided to do his residency in geriatrics. The choice surprised me. I always thought he'd go for a more glamorous specialty, like plastic surgery or cardiology. "It's a promising field, Mom," he explained. "The population is aging. The elderly have resources accumulated over a lifetime, and most doctors don't want to work with them. It's a perfect market niche." I noted how he spoke of resources and market niche, not of caring for vulnerable people or providing quality of life in old age. But again, I silenced my unease. He was an adult man now, with his own motivations and worldviews. Who was I to judge? After his residency, to my surprise and joy, Ryan announced he was returning to Hannibal. "I want to work where I can really make a difference, Mom," he said, with that charming smile he used when he wanted something. "Besides, it's time to take care of you. You're not getting any younger." I was 71 at the time, still working part-time at the school, still taking care of my own house, still living an active and healthy life. But the idea of having my son back, now a fully fledged doctor, was too tempting to question his motives. Ryan returned and quickly set up his geriatric clinic, the first specialized one in the region. He had a special way with elderly patients and their families, gentle, attentive, explaining everything with patience. Soon his schedule was full, with a waiting list weeks long to get an appointment. He bought a big house, an imported car, and started moving in the most influential circles in town. In less than a year, he was engaged to Ashley, the mayor's daughter, a pretty, ambitious girl in her mid-20s. At first, he was all attention with me, frequent visits, gifts, invitations to dinner at his new house. Gradually, however, the worrying comments began. Small, subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but they grew in frequency and severity. "Mom, do you really need such a big house? It's so much work to maintain, and you're all alone in this huge place. Those savings of yours in a savings account are losing value, you know? Inflation eats everything. We could invest it better. I have some contacts that guarantee a much higher return. You should retire already. Enjoy life. Why keep teaching at your age? You've already contributed so much, you deserve to rest." The most disturbing were the comments he made when he thought I wasn't listening or wouldn't understand the meaning. Once, during a Sunday lunch with some doctor friends, I heard him say in the backyard, "The biggest problem with the healthcare system is these expensive treatments for terminal elderly patients. They spend a fortune to prolong lives by a few months that no longer have quality. All that money goes to useless treatments when it could stay with the family, be invested, generate real wealth. Another time, on a call he thought I couldn't hear. These locked-up inheritances are a serious problem. The money just sits in the hands of old people who don't know how to manage it. Meanwhile, we, who could do something productive with it, have to wait decades sometimes. The pressure for me to sell my house where I had lived my entire adult life, raised my son, kept all my memories became more and more intense. It's a stagnant asset, Mom, in a neighborhood that's not what it used to be. We could sell it for a good price, buy you a smaller, more modern condo, and invest the difference. When I resisted these ideas, the guilt trip would come. After everything I sacrificed for you, coming back to live in this small town, giving up much bigger opportunities in Chicago. You don't trust me to take care of your assets? The truth, which I only understood much later, was that Ryan was up to his neck in debt. The luxurious lifestyle he maintained, the house, the car, the trips, the expensive gifts for his fiancée, the dinners at fine restaurants, was incompatible with the income of a newly established doctor in rural Missouri. He had made risky investments that went wrong, taken out loans from loan sharks, bet on get-rich-quick schemes that ended in fraud. And now he desperately needed money to keep up appearances, to not lose his influential fiancée, to not fall from grace in the local society that admired him so much. And there I was, his elderly mother, with a paid-off house in a valued area, modest but solid savings, a piece of land near the river that had appreciated significantly with the growth of ecotourism. It wasn't a fortune by big city standards, but in Hannibal, it was enough to pay off his debts and keep him afloat for a while. The problem? I had no intention of selling anything, of handing over control of my finances, of giving up the independence I had fought so hard to achieve. And worse, I knew my son too well to believe the stories of guaranteed investments and can't-miss opportunities he was trying to sell me. That's when Ryan started to change tactics. Persuasion didn't work. The guilt trips failed. So now, the son will stop asking for her assets and start taking her competence. This is where the story turns dark. You'll want to hear what he does next. If he couldn't convince me to hand over my assets voluntarily, he would find another way. And what way more effective than making everyone believe I was losing my mental capacity, that I could no longer make decisions for myself, that I needed a legal guardian to manage my affairs? And what guardian more natural than my only son, a respected doctor, specializing in geriatrics, who sacrificed so much by returning to the countryside to care for his elderly mother. The plan was perfect, subtle, gradual, almost impossible to detect. Except for one detail, he underestimated the chemistry teacher I had become, the meticulous observer Catherine had trained me to be. The woman who had spent decades documenting the effects of heavy metals on the human body, he underestimated his own mother. As I said, Ryan returned to Hannibal and set up the first specialized geriatric clinic in the region. At first, it seemed like everything had worked out. My son, a doctor, returning to his roots to care for the elderly of our land. His clinic was in an old 2-story building that he completely renovated, with a ramp at the entrance, handrails everywhere, a waiting room with special chairs. Soon it was full of patients, with a waiting list weeks long to get an appointment. But along with professional success came a lifestyle that didn't match the reality of our town. He bought a house on the hill, one of those with a high wall and an intercom, something nobody had around here. He drove a big, imported sedan that turned heads on every corner. Clothes only from designer brands, an expensive watch on his wrist, shoes that shined brighter than the midday sun. In Hannibal, where most people live on minimum wage, Social Security, and small business income, Ryan flaunted wealth like a doctor from the big city. People commented. Of course, some admired him, dreaming that their own children could get where my Ryan got. Others were suspicious. Where did so much money come from to support all that luxury? A doctor makes good money, but not that much, especially not in rural Missouri. I wondered too, but I kept my mouth shut. After all, my son was educated, an adult. He had the right to spend what he earned as he pleased. It was around this time that he started dating Ashley, daughter of Mayor Thompson, a pretty girl in her mid-20s, educated in Street Louis, the type who spoke with a certain sophistication. The dating soon turned into an engagement, with a huge party at the Hannibal Country Club. imported champagne, catering from Street Louis, a band from the city, an ostentation the town had never seen. Mayor Thompson, a career politician with bigger ambitions, saw Ryan as the perfect son-in-law, a respected, well-spoken doctor who knew how to charm the town's elderly loyal voters and impress the young with his success. Soon, they were making plans together. Ryan would run for city council in the next election, then maybe deputy mayor, and so on. Ambition and politics have always been good partners in this old country. Meanwhile, his relationship with me was growing cold. At first, it was just impatience when I took too long to understand something, or when I repeated a story I had already told. A normal thing for a mother in her 70 seconds. But it got worse, turning into something uglier. Malicious comments, looks of contempt, long sighs when I spoke. "Mom, you've already told that story 3 times today alone," he'd say in front of visitors, making me look senile. Or, "It's no use explaining, she won't understand anyway," as if I were a child or not even in the room. The worst were the references to my stubbornness, especially when I refused to follow his suggestions about selling the house or transferring my savings. "You've always been hard-headed, but now it's getting impossible," he'd complain. "It's this age, it makes people more stubborn, more suspicious." It was about a year after he returned to Hannibal that Ryan started his daily visits to my house. Suddenly, he became the most attentive son in the world. He'd show up every afternoon after work, always bringing something. One day it was a cake from "that bakery you like." The next, a special juice full of vitamins. He started bringing medicine too. Vitamins for the brain, supplements to strengthen bones, capsules for circulation. I took everything without question. Why would I doubt my own son, a doctor, who only wanted what was best for me? Even when I started noticing a strange taste in some of these medicines, metallic, like rust on the tongue, I thought it was just old age, my taste buds not working right anymore. Slowly, Ryan began to change the narrative about my health. If before I was stubborn and difficult, now I started hearing more serious things. "I'm worried about my mother's memory," he'd tell friends we met on the street. "The other day, she left the stove on and almost caused a fire." It had never happened, but who would doubt a doctor's word? Once, taking a pie to a neighbor for her birthday, I overheard Ryan talking to her in the yard. "Mrs. Miller, I need to ask you a favor. If you see my mom looking disoriented on the street, call me immediately. She's been going out alone when she shouldn't, and I'm afraid she'll get lost. The tests aren't encouraging, you know, early onset dementia, but she refuses to accept her limitations." I stood there paralyzed, pie in hand. What tests? What dementia? Ryan had never mentioned any of this to me. I walked into the room pretending I hadn't heard, handed over the pie, made an excuse, and left. I went home with my head spinning. Something was very wrong, but I still couldn't put the pieces together. As these accidental conversations multiplied, always with Ryan talking about my supposed mental decline to other people when he thought I wasn't listening, the medicines also increased. Now he brought colorful pill organizers with compartments separated by day and time. "This blue one is for your heart, this white one for blood pressure, this yellow one for memory, this clear one to help you sleep." That's when the real symptoms began. Small tremors in my hands, almost imperceptible at first. A dizzy spell here and there, forgetfulness I'd never experienced before. Not remembering the name of a former student I ran into at the supermarket. Losing track of the day of the week, forgetting where I put my house keys. Nothing catastrophic, things that happen to any elderly person. But they seemed to confirm what Ryan was saying around town about my mental state. One night, after eating a soup he had brought, I got so sick I thought I was going to die. Vomiting, shaking, a cold sweat, blurred vision. Ryan happened to show up. I later understood he had calculated exactly when the symptoms would be strongest and played the part of the dedicated doctor. He took my blood pressure, gave me something to calm me down, and said he needed to take me to the hospital. It was the first of many emergency trips to the hospital where he worked. There, his colleagues always reached the same conclusion. Signs of progressive dementia, possible Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. Nothing definitive, but very concerning. None of them ever considered heavy metal poisoning. Why would they? The patient was the mother of a respected colleague, a specialist in exactly these kinds of diseases. If he said it was dementia, who would question him? That's when the isolation began in earnest. Ryan convinced everyone, neighbors, friends, former colleagues, church acquaintances, that I was in no condition to receive visitors, that I got agitated by the presence of strangers, that I needed a controlled environment. People, out of respect for him or genuine concern for me, stopped coming by. My world, already small since retirement, shrank until it fit only within the walls of my house. To take better care of me, Ryan hired a nurse, Alice, a serious woman of few words, who spent the day watching me with a look that mixed pity and something else. Today I know it was suspicion. She administered the medications, strictly following Ryan's instructions, and made detailed reports about my behavior that she delivered directly to him. She was, in practice, more of a jailer than a caregiver. Ryan also simplified my communication with the outside world. First, he canceled the landline, claiming I was calling people in the middle of the night without realizing it, telling confusing stories and scaring everyone. Then he gave me a special senior cell phone with big buttons and limited functions. Only later did I discover that the device had been modified to only receive calls, never make them, and only from pre-programmed numbers, his, the nurses, and the clinics. The few who insisted on visiting me faced nearly impossible barriers. Mrs. Joyce Peterson, my friend of 50 years and my prayer partner, was stopped at the door with the excuse that I was sedated after a crisis. Joshua, my brightest former student, now the chemistry teacher in the position I left vacant, tried to see me 3 times. All 3 times, he was informed by Alice that I wouldn't recognize him and it would only make my condition worse. And so, in a matter of months, I found myself completely isolated, dependent only on Ryan and the silent nurse he had chosen. My world had been reduced to a chair on the porch, occasional walks in the yard, always supervised, and the television, which I could barely follow as my concentration deteriorated. Because the symptoms were getting much, much worse. My motor coordination, which had always been excellent even in old age, the pride of someone who spent a lifetime handling delicate glassware in a lab, was the first thing to seriously decay. My hands shook so much I'd spill soup from the spoon before it reached my mouth. I tried to write, and only an unrecognizable scrawl came out. Nothing like the neat cursive I'd maintained my whole life. My memory was next. It wasn't just trivial forgetfulness anymore. It was terrifying lapses. I'd forget what I ate for lunch. I wouldn't remember if I had showered that day. Once I looked at Alice and, for a terrible instant, I didn't recognize who this woman in my house was. These moments came and went. Sometimes I was perfectly lucid. Other times, I felt lost in a mental fog. Then came the blurred vision, as if I were always looking through a dirty window. The constant headaches, hammering at my temples. The persistent metallic taste in my mouth that no mints or brushing could remove. My hair, which even in my 70 seconds was still thick, began to fall out in clumps. I'd find whole hanks of it on the pillow in the morning, in the shower drain after bathing. In my moments of lucidity, which were becoming rarer and shorter, I tried to understand what was happening. There was something deeply wrong, something beyond natural aging, or even common diseases of old age. It felt as if my body was being attacked from within, systematically destroyed by some invisible force. Ryan took me to medical appointments regularly, always with his friends and colleagues. On these occasions, he spoke for me. He answered questions before I could even open my mouth. "She's been very confused, doctor. Just yesterday she had an aggressive episode, yelled at the nurse for no reason. Her short-term memory is practically gone." And I, with my tongue heavy from the pills he gave me before we left the house, could barely protest. The doctors would examine me superficially, ask a few basic orientation questions. What day is it? Who is the president? Exchange significant glances with Ryan, and invariably conclude, symptoms consistent with senile dementia. We'll adjust the medication and monitor. No one, at any point, considered running toxicology tests or looking for non-neurological causes for my symptoms. Why would they? The diagnosis had already been given by the son, a doctor, a specialist in exactly this subject. To question it would be almost a professional offense. It was on one of those days of mental fog that fate, or perhaps divine providence, gave me a lifeline. Ryan had left to handle an emergency at the clinic. Alice was in the kitchen preparing lunch. I was sitting in the living room with a blanket on my legs. Even in the Missouri heat. Another strange symptom, constant cold, staring at the bookshelves without really seeing them. Suddenly, like a lightning bolt cutting through the mist, I had a moment of absolute clarity. My eyes focused on a specific book on the shelf, my old copy of Advanced Toxicology, which I used to prepare lectures. Something about that faded blue cover called to me like a lighthouse in a storm. With immense effort, I got up on my unstable feet and went to the shelf. I grabbed the book with trembling hands, praying Alice wouldn't appear to stop me. She didn't like me messing with things, unsupervised. I opened it to a random page and almost fell over from the shock. There, underlined by my own hand decades ago, was a paragraph on mercury poisoning, and the symptoms listed were exactly what I had been experiencing for the past few months. Tremors, lack of coordination, memory problems, metallic taste, hair loss, blurred vision, a feeling of cold even in a warm environment. Everything was there, described in precise scientific detail, in a list that seemed to have been made by observing my own decline. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when I turned the page and read about the methods of administering the poison. Small, consistent doses, usually in food or drink, producing a gradual deterioration that can easily be mistaken for neurological diseases, especially in the elderly. I closed the book and hid it under the sofa cushion when I heard Alice returning. But that moment of discovery had lit a spark of lucidity and determination that the mercury had not yet managed to extinguish. I was being systematically, deliberately poisoned, and there was only one person with the access, knowledge, and motive to do it: my son. My suspicion was confirmed on the worst night of my confinement. I woke up in the middle of the night with a tremor so violent I thought the bed was shaking in an earthquake. It was only when I turned on the lamp that I understood. The earthquake was me. Writhing in bed, I tried to reach the phone on the nightstand. My uncontrolled hand struck the very pills that Ryan had left organized. The bottles scattered, shattering on the floor. And right then, in that moment of agony, fate gave me a little wink. Under the weak light of the lamp, I saw a strange liquid seeping from one of the broken vials. It wasn't clear like normal medicine. It had a silvery sheen, almost mesmerizing. It was like a lightning bolt shot through my dizzy head. That sheen, I knew it. I had shown it to hundreds of students over the years, warning them of the dangers. Mercury, the liquid metal that slowly destroys the nervous system. The realization hit me. It wasn't dementia. It was poisoning. In the following days, even with my mind still clouded by the poison, I began to observe patterns. The tremors and mental confusion got significantly worse after I took certain specific supplements, especially the clear capsules that Ryan brought personally, not the ones that came in pre-packaged boxes from the pharmacy. The soup he made a point of bringing every Wednesday always left me feeling particularly ill the next morning. The water in the special jug had that peculiar metallic taste that I now recognized. I needed proof. I needed help. But I was practically a prisoner in my own home, watched 24 hours a day, with no means of communication with the outside world, and my credibility completely destroyed by the stories Ryan had been spreading about my dementia. It was then that I found, by pure chance, another unexpected ally: my old notebooks. I was in the attic, where Alice had allowed me to go to look for a photo album, one of the few activities she considered harmless for my condition. Rummaging through dusty boxes, I found dozens of hardcover notebooks where I had meticulously recorded experiments, observations, and research over 4 decades as a teacher and amateur researcher. I picked up an especially old one with a faded cover and yellowed pages. Inside, beside scientific notes, I found something I had completely forgotten: a code. A form of ciphered writing I had developed in my youth to record observations of experiments I didn't want other teachers to copy. It was a simple letter substitution system, nothing sophisticated, but one that nobody could decipher without the key, which was engraved only in my memory. There, sitting on the dusty attic floor, I had an idea. If I couldn't trust anyone, if I couldn't communicate freely, at least I could document. I could record what was happening, save evidence, create a trail that someone could eventually follow, even if only after my death. I hid the oldest notebook inside a pillowcase I no longer used and began my small resistance. In my moments of lucidity, which usually came early in the morning, before the first dose of medicine, or when I managed to pretend to swallow the pills but actually hid them in my cheek to spit out later, I noted dates, symptoms, medication times, reactions, all in my old code, which would look like the incoherent ramblings of a senile mind to anyone who found it. I also started collecting samples. I saved a little of the liquid from each. Special medicine, a few drops of the weekly soup, a spoonful of the fortifying vitamin. I hid everything in unlikely places. Inside a bar of soap I had made at a science fair decades ago, in the false bottom of a handkerchief drawer, in a secret compartment of an old sewing box, places only I knew, that were part of my personal history. Meanwhile, to buy time and avoid suspicion, I pretended I was getting worse faster than I actually was. I exaggerated the tremors when Ryan or Alice were watching. I pretended not to recognize occasional visitors he allowed, usually friends of his or his future mother-in-law, who came more to confirm my deplorable state than out of genuine concern. I asked repetitive questions, feigned confusion about dates and places. The more incapacitated I seemed, the less vigilant they became. The final piece of the puzzle came on a Sunday, when Ryan had taken me to his house for lunch. A rare event, probably to show his fiancée and future father-in-law what a dedicated son he was, caring for his demented mother. While everyone was on the patio having coffee, I pretended I needed to use the restroom. On the way back, I got confused and accidentally walked into Ryan's office. There, in the desk drawer, I opened with trembling hands. Some things didn't need faking. The mercury had already caused real damage. I found 2 documents that confirmed my worst suspicions. A life insurance policy in my name with Ryan as the sole beneficiary for the amount of $500,000 taken out only 6 months prior, and a folder filled with collection notices for unpaid loans, letters from loan sharks threatening consequences, and notifications of credit cards canceled for non-payment. The insurance policy was the plan. These debts are the motive. Ryan isn't just cruel, he's desperate. A desperate man is capable of anything, as Mrs. Sullivan is about to find out. My son was drowning in debt and had bet on my death as the solution. A natural death from causes consistent with advanced age, which wouldn't raise suspicions and would guarantee the insurance payout. Meanwhile, he was already preparing the ground to take control of my assets through a legal guardianship process. The papers for that were also there, already filled out, just waiting for the right moment to be filed with the court. I went back to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and composed myself enough to return to the patio without raising suspicion. But now I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was in a race against time, against the poison already circulating in my blood, against the son who had turned into a murderer, and against a system that was all geared up to believe him instead of me. That very evening, I overheard, or perhaps it was planned for me to overhear, a conversation between Ryan and Ashley on my own porch. He had brought me back and stayed to chat with his fiancée while I was supposedly already asleep. "I can't take this situation anymore," he said, his voice impatient. "The old woman is taking too long to go. The doctors said that with this condition and at her age, it was a matter of weeks, a few months at most. It's been almost 8 months, and she's still there, stubbornly breathing." "Calm down, honey," Ashley replied in that syrupy voice. "It will be resolved soon, and then we'll have the insurance money to plan our dream wedding, pay off your debts, and still have some left over for Daddy's campaign." "I can't wait much longer," he insisted. "The creditors are breathing down my neck. I've already increased the dose as much as I can without leaving obvious residues. Any more than this, and any autopsy will detect it." "Then find another way," she said, cold as ice. "A household accident, a fall down the stairs. Old people fall all the time. No one will suspect a thing." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just slow poisoning anymore. Now they were contemplating something more direct, more immediate. My own son and his fiancée, coolly planning how to speed up my death to get their hands on the insurance money. I had to act fast. I could no longer wait for someone to accidentally discover what was happening. I needed an ally, someone outside of Ryan's circle of influence, someone who still trusted me, or at least was willing to consider my side of the story. I thought of Matthew, my former student, who was now the pharmacist at the only drugstore in town. He had been one of the brightest students I ever taught, especially interested in toxicology. And more importantly, he was one of the few people who had insisted on visiting me, even after Ryan started spreading stories about my dementia. The problem was how to contact him. I had no phone. I couldn't leave alone. I was always watched. The solution came in the form of the only person who came and went freely from the house. Sarah, the cleaning lady who came twice a week to do the heavy cleaning Alice couldn't handle. Sarah was a simple young woman, almost illiterate, whom Ryan and Alice treated as invisible. They'd discuss confidential things in front of her, as if she were a piece of furniture, not a person. That was their mistake. Because Sarah might not have had much schooling, but she had eyes that saw and ears that heard. And, most importantly, she had a heart. She sensed something was wrong in that house, in the way they treated me, in the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. One day, when Alice had gone to the grocery store and we were alone, I gathered my courage and approached Sarah. In a low, urgent voice, I explained that I needed help, that I was being poisoned, that my life was in danger. I showed her the tremors in my hands, the notebook with the coded notes, the hidden samples of medicine. I don't know if she understood everything, but she understood enough. I was in danger and needed help. "You were always good to me, Mrs. Sullivan," she said, her eyes welling up. "You paid a fair wage, treated me with respect, not like your son, who talks to me like I'm an idiot. What can I do?" I gave her the note, folded so small it fit in her palm. My hand trembled so violently I could barely let it go. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice cracking, "they will say I am crazy. They will fire you. You could be in danger." She closed her hand around the note and, for the first time, she didn't look away. Her eyes, which I had always seen as timid, were now steady. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said, her voice quiet but fierce, "my own grandmother was put in a home by her children. They said she was confused. We lost her. I am not letting them do that to you." In a house full of enemies, the one person they never noticed just became her lifeline. This is the turning point. The teacher is about to gather her allies. You don't want to miss this part. In that moment, she wasn't just Sarah the cleaner. She was the first ray of light I had seen in a year. The first person who saw me times, and not the senile old woman Ryan had created. She carried out the mission with a discretion that surprised me. She brought notes hidden in the lining of her uniform, carried away samples of the suspicious medicines, and relayed instructions on how I should proceed to minimize the poison's absorption while we looked for a solution. It was Matthew who confirmed, through clandestine tests done after hours at the pharmacy, that there was indeed mercury in the special supplements Ryan was giving me. He also managed to contact a toxicologist in Colombia, who advised on how to proceed to document the case in a way that would be accepted as evidence. Meanwhile, I continued my performance. To Ryan and Alice's eyes, I was getting worse and worse, more confused, weaker, more dependent. In reality, following the toxicologist's advice, via Matthew, I was taking natural chelating agents that Sarah brought hidden to help my body eliminate the mercury and replacing the poisoned medicines with harmless placebos whenever possible. It was an absurd, almost unbelievable situation. Me, a 76-year-old retired teacher, having to act like a spy in my own home, deceiving my own son, who was trying to kill me slowly. If it wasn't so tragic, it would be comical. While I gathered evidence and planned my defense, my health was genuinely deteriorating. As much as I tried to avoid the poisoning by swapping pills and refusing suspicious foods, I already had too much mercury accumulated in my system. I reached the most critical point of my life. I could barely get out of bed without help, my legs weak as reeds in a flood, the tremors so strong I couldn't even hold a glass of water. Matthew, my ex-student pharmacist, who had become my guardian angel in all this, managed to analyze the samples I'd collected. The results were terrifying. Mercury levels far above what any accidental contamination could explain. "Professor," he told me, through notes Sarah brought hidden in her apron, "this is deliberate poisoning. There is no other explanation. The levels are too high to be accidental." It was around this time, when I was practically bedridden, that Ryan took the step I had been dreading. He initiated the legal guardianship proceedings. I heard him talking to the lawyer in the living room, thinking I was asleep. I had learned to feign deep sleep, to overhear what they said when they thought I wasn't listening. The process is simple. The lawyer, a Mr. Davis who had a reputation in town for solving any problem for a price, explained. With the medical reports we already have, the signatures of 3 specialists confirming the advanced dementia, and your testimony as the only son and a doctor, the guardianship will be granted in a matter of weeks. Judge Reynolds is sympathetic to these family cases. And after? Ryan asked, with that anxious voice I had learned to recognize when he talked about money. After, you, as the legal guardian, will have full power to manage her assets. You can sell property, make investments, move accounts, all in her best interest, of course. The lawyer gave a complicit little laugh that turned my stomach. And the commitment? Ryan insisted. With the guardianship, it's much easier. You can have her committed to a specialized clinic, even against her will. It will be considered a necessary measure for the patient's well-being. I know an excellent one in Colombia. Discreet. They don't ask many questions. I understood then that the plan had changed. Ryan was no longer willing to wait for the mercury to do its full work. He wanted to declare me legally incompetent, lock me up somewhere no one knew me, where he could continue poisoning me without the inconvenience of having to pretend to be a dedicated son, without the risk of someone in town noticing something strange. My time was running out. I had to act, and fast. I asked Sarah to bring all my old notebooks from the attic, especially the ones that talked about heavy metals and detoxification. At first, she hesitated, afraid Alice would catch her. But I finally convinced her. Girl, I said with all sincerity, if you don't bring them, I am going to die. It's as simple as that. When I finally had the notebooks, I took advantage of a day when Ryan had traveled to Colombia, probably to finalize details at the clinic, where he planned to bury me alive, to review everything I had studied and taught about mercury over 4 decades. I was weak, but the adrenaline of desperation kept me focused. In one of the oldest notebooks, from when I took a course on advanced toxicology in St. Louis in the 82nds, I found what I was looking for: detoxification protocols for heavy metals. There were detailed notes on chelators, substances that bind to metals in the blood, helping the body eliminate them. Some were controlled drugs, impossible to get without a prescription. But there were also natural alternatives, less potent, but still effective, especially for chronic exposure like mine. I then developed a meticulous plan based on the chemical principles I knew so well. I would need help, a lot of help. But for the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. The chemistry that had been my passion my whole life would now be my salvation. Through Sarah, I sent precise instructions to Matthew, a list of natural chelating substances I would need, procedures for preparing placebos identical to the pills Ryan gave me, and a detailed detoxification schedule. It wouldn't be fast or easy, but it was possible, as long as I had enough time before the forced commitment. Matthew's answer came the next day, hidden inside a box of crackers that Sarah brought as if it were a gift from her. I'm gathering everything. You are not alone. Trust me. What I didn't expect was that Matthew would do much more than just follow my instructions. In a matter of days, he mobilized a true clandestine support network. Former students of mine, scattered across various professions in town. Lisa, a nurse at the regional hospital, who had been my student 20 years ago. Peter, who had become a biology teacher and kept an amateur lab in his house. Even Detective Scott, a former student no one thought would amount to much, but who had become a police detective after a long struggle. This network operated in the shadows, exchanging information, collecting evidence, analyzing samples, all without Ryan or his allies suspecting a thing. Messages were passed in simple codes through unsuspecting intermediaries. A neighbor bringing a pie. The yeast didn't rise properly, meant the results had come back positive for mercury. A propane delivery guy commenting on the weather, "It's going to rain today," was code for, "We have new evidence." Sarah, whom Ryan and Alice believed was almost illiterate, she had difficulty reading, but was far from incapable, as they assumed, became the most important messenger in this network. Her simple appearance and the way her superiors underestimated her made her the perfect spy. Ryan would say things in front of her that he would never have said if he knew that every word was being mentally recorded and later relayed. Mrs. Ruth Jenkins, my 82-year-old neighbor, whom Ryan treated as if she were a senile, harmless old woman, had eagle eyes and sharp ears. From her window, she logged who entered and left my house, times, suspicious packages, conversations she could overhear when they spoke loudly in the yard. Everything went into a little notebook that she gave to her granddaughter every week, another former student of mine, who was now a teacher at the same school where I taught for decades. Peter, the biology teacher, turned his home lab into a clandestine analysis center. With basic equipment, he could detect the presence of mercury in the samples we collected, not with the precision of a professional lab, but enough to confirm it wasn't my paranoia. The contamination was real, deliberate, and systematic. While this network was working, I began my own detoxification process. Matthew sent, disguised in regular vitamin bottles, capsules containing natural chelating agents, chlorella, cilantro, garlic, turmeric, and other herbs known to help the body eliminate heavy metals. It wasn't as effective as a proper hospital treatment, but it was what we could do under the circumstances. At the same time, I started replacing the poisoned pills with placebos. Sarah brought empty capsules identical to the ones Ryan gave me, which I filled with flour or cornstarch, swapping them in the bottles when no one was looking. I saved the original pills as additional proof of the poisoning. The homemade detoxification was a slow and unpleasant process. It had side effects, nausea, even worse headaches, cold sweats that sometimes left me feeling as bad as the mercury itself. But slowly, I began to feel small improvements. Longer moments of mental clarity, slightly less intense tremors, my vision clearing up a bit. I had to hide this improvement, of course. I continued to feign confusion, extreme weakness, even occasional incontinence. That was the most humiliating part, but it was necessary to maintain the farce. Ryan needed to believe his plan was working, that I was wasting away as expected. Meanwhile, I systematically documented everything. In my secret code, I recorded every suspicious pill, every symptom, every improvement after starting the clandestine treatment. I saved samples, labeled them, dated them. When I had enough strength, I wrote detailed testimonies about everything that had happened since the poisoning began. The cleaning lady, Sarah, also started recording conversations. Her old cell phone, which Ryan and Alice paid no attention to, was left on in her apron pocket, capturing discussions about increasing the dose, speeding up the process, resolving the problem before the wedding. They were poor quality recordings, with a lot of background noise, but good enough to capture the tone and some incriminating phrases. The riskiest strategy came from Detective Scott. He provided a tiny recording device hidden inside a picture frame that Sarah accidentally put in the wrong place during her cleaning, right on the end table next to the sofa, where Ryan often talked with his lawyer or his fiancée. It captured several explicit conversations about the guardianship, the planned commitment, and even comments about the life insurance and the debts that would be paid with the money. After nearly a month of this meticulous work of collecting evidence and clandestine detoxification, I received the news I dreaded most. The judge had scheduled the guardianship hearing for the following week. Ryan seemed increasingly anxious, checking my conditions several times a day, making comments about how I looked worse and maybe needed more intensive care. It was time to spring the trap. Following the plan I had worked out with the support network, I began to simulate a dramatic decline. I stopped responding to questions, even simple ones. I stared into space for long periods. I trembled more than usual. This didn't require much acting. I even drooled a little when I knew they were watching. Ryan took the bait. After seeing me in this terminal state for 2 days, he called his lawyer for an urgent visit. They discussed it in the study, but the recorder in the picture frame caught everything. They were fast-tracking the process, trying to get an emergency commitment order even before the formal hearing. The next morning, when Ryan came to check on me, I did something that caught him completely off guard. I spoke with clarity for the first time in weeks. "Son, I need to tell you something important. I think I'm dying." He froze for a moment, eyes wide as if he'd seen a ghost. Then he composed himself, sat on the edge of the bed, and took my hand with false tenderness. "Don't say that, Mom. You're going to be fine. I'm taking care of everything." "I know you are." I paused dramatically. gathering my strength. That's why. I want to thank you for everything you've done for me, and I also wanted to ask for your forgiveness. This truly intrigued him. Forgiveness? For what, Mom? For not being a better mother. For pushing you so hard. For keeping a secret from you for all these years. I saw the interest light up in his eyes. You could practically hear the gears turning in his head. Was there hidden money? A property he didn't know about? An unmentioned inheritance? What secret, Mom? His syrupy voice could barely disguise the greed. It's too heavy to carry alone. Before I go, I need to tell you. But I can't talk now. I'm too weak. I closed my eyes as if exhausted. Come here tonight, when everything is quiet, so we can talk one last time, just the two of us. This is it. She's using his own greed to spring the trap. The demented old woman is about to turn the tables on her brilliant doctor son. You have to hear this final confrontation. Ryan agreed immediately. I imagine he thought it was his perfect chance. A final private moment with me, perhaps to help my suffering end more quickly if I didn't reveal anything of value. We agreed he would come at 9 p.m., after Alice had already left. She didn't sleep there, and we would be alone. What he didn't know was that we wouldn't be alone at all. I spent the day preparing, gathering all the evidence I had collected over the months. The notebooks with my coded notes, the samples of contaminated medicine, the recordings. Matthew, Detective, Scott, and other members of the support network were also preparing, positioning themselves strategically. At 9 p.m. on the dot, Ryan arrived. He found me sitting up in bed, propped against pillows, apparently weak but conscious. He closed the bedroom door and sat in the chair beside the bed. So, Mom, what is this important secret? I looked deep into his eyes, the same eyes that once belonged to a little boy I loved more than life itself, and said in a firm, clear voice, "The secret is that I know you've been poisoning me with mercury for months. I know about the life insurance, the debts, the plans to have me committed. I know everything, Ryan." His expression went from surprise to shock, then to anger, all in a matter of seconds. For a moment, I thought he would deny it, try to convince me it was a delusion from my dementia. But then I saw something change in his eyes, a cold, calculating acceptance. The mask had fallen completely. How did you find out? His voice no longer had that syrupy, concerned tone. It was hard, metallic. I'm a chemistry teacher, son. A specialist in heavy metals. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize the symptoms of mercury poisoning? Did you think I wouldn't know the characteristic taste in the medicine you gave me? He gave a cruel smile I had never seen on that face. And what do you plan to do? Who would believe you? An old woman with an advanced dementia diagnosis, signed by 3 specialists, against the word of a respected doctor, with no proof. It was my turn to smile. I pointed to the dresser. Open the first drawer. Suspicious, he got up and opened it. Inside, organized meticulously, were all the original medicine vials, with dates, samples of the contents, separated into makeshift test tubes, and the notebooks with my notes. This proves nothing, he said. But I noticed a slight tremor in his voice. Anyone can put anything in a vial and say it came from me. Second drawer. In it were copies of the lab reports Matthew and Peter had managed to get, confirming the presence of mercury in the samples. They wouldn't be admissible in court, as they didn't come from an official lab, but they were convincing enough to shake his confidence. It could have been accidental contamination, he tried, less confident now. That river has always had mercury from the old mining operations. Third drawer. Ryan opened it and found the small recorder Detective Scott had provided. I pressed the play button. His own voice filled the room, crystal clear. I can't wait much longer. The creditors are breathing down my neck. I've already increased the dose as much as I can, without leaving obvious residues. Followed by Ashley's voice. Then find another way. A household accident. A fall down the stairs. Old people fall all the time. He turned pale, shutting off the recorder violently. You wretched old woman. You think this will go anywhere? I'll destroy all of this right now. And then, his voice dropped to a menacing whisper. Then we're going to have that accident, Ashley suggested. Right here, right now. He lunged at me, his eyes injected with pure hatred, his hands reaching for my throat. The mask is finally gone. This is the moment the calculating doctor becomes a cornered animal. He's about to make his final, fatal mistake. In that moment, I wasn't afraid. I just felt pity. The son I cherished, the boy I had raised, was gone. The creature standing before me was just a stranger, a monster backed into a corner. I'll give you the accident you've been waiting for. I didn't scream. I didn't flinch. All the fear had been burned out of me by the poison and the grief. I just looked at him. My son, this stranger. Go ahead, Ryan, I said, my voice quiet, but it stopped him cold. Do it. Show me the monster you've become. But know this. They're already listening. He froze, his hands inches from my neck. What? The recorder, Ryan. It's not just in the drawer. It's live. Detective Scott has been listening to this entire conversation. I nodded toward the small digital clock on my nightstand, its simple red numbers hiding a microphone. His face went from rage to a sick, pale white. The realization. It wasn't just that he was caught. It was that Times had caught him. The chemistry teacher. His senile mother. At that exact moment, as if summoned by my words, the bedroom door flew open. Detective Scott entered, followed by 2 police officers. Dr. Ryan Sullivan, Detective Scott said formally. You are under arrest. People think that was the end. It wasn't. It was merely the end of one kind of pain and the beginning of another, much deeper one. How can you possibly feel victorious when you've just had to destroy what was left of your family simply to survive? The scene that followed was chaotic. Ryan tried to deny everything, then tried to flee. Finally, he tried to assault Detective Scott. He was subdued, handcuffed, and dragged out, all while screaming that I was crazy, that it was all a conspiracy, that he had proof of my dementia. That same night, with search warrants obtained thanks to the recordings and preliminary evidence, the police found far more at his house and clinic than we expected. Pure mercury hidden in a false compartment in his desk, detailed notes on dosages and expected symptoms, forged documents with my mimicked signature, and most shocking of all, records of other elderly patients who had presented symptoms similar to mine, all with substantial life insurance policies, and Ryan as their primary physician. The bomb exploded in our quiet little town. The respected doctor, engaged to the mayor's daughter, arrested for trying to kill his own mother for money. It was too big a scandal, even for Hannibal, which had seen its share of stories. Ashley vanished from town the next day, taking whatever she could carry. Mayor Thompson denied any knowledge of the plan, although the recordings suggested otherwise. Ryan's clinic was shut down, and a broader investigation began to see if other elderly patients had been victims of similar practices. I was taken to the regional hospital, where I finally received proper treatment for the detoxification. The doctors were stunned at how effective my homemade treatment had been. I had managed to significantly reduce the mercury levels in my blood with improvised methods based on solid scientific knowledge and decades of experience. The legal process was long and painful. I had to relive the entire traumatic experience in detailed testimonies. I faced aggressive defense attorneys who tried to use the false dementia diagnoses, the ones Ryan himself had fabricated against me. I had to listen to my son, my only son, deny everything, call me crazy, and try to convince the jury it was all the imagining of a senile mind. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The recordings, the contaminated samples, now analyzed by official state labs, the testimonies from dozens of witnesses who had observed Ryan's gradual transformation from dedicated son to cruel manipulator, the records of other patients with similar symptoms, the forgeries, the life insurance policy he had taken out in my name without my knowledge. After a 6-month trial, the verdict came. Ryan was sentenced to 25 years in prison for attempted murder in the first degree, with aggravating factors of poisoning, abuse of trust, and heinous motive, with no chance of parole for the first 15 years. Watching my son be led away in handcuffs to serve a sentence that meant spending the rest of his youth and the beginning of his old age behind bars was the hardest moment of my life. Harder than the poisoning, harder than the fight for survival, harder than anything I had ever been through. He was the fruit of my womb, the boy I had rocked in my arms, the child for whom I had sacrificed everything, the young man in whom I had placed all my hopes. And now he was a criminal, a monster who had coolly calculated my death, who had poisoned me day after day while smiling and pretending to care for me. The months after the trial, they didn't feel like a victory. They felt hollow. The poison was leaving my body, but the betrayal had sunk into my bones. Worse than the metallic taste of the mercury was the bitter taste of truth. My son, my only child, the boy I had rocked to sleep, had looked me in the eyes every day while measuring out my death in drops. I spent weeks just staring at the walls of my new home. I had to sell the old one. The memories were toxic, and asking, why? Not just, why did he do it? But why did I survive? I wasn't just healing my body. I was trying to find a reason to have a body to heal. The anger came first, a raging fire that made me want to burn every memory of him. Then came the grief, a cold, empty ocean so deep I thought I would drown in it. I had to mourn a son who was still alive. Healing wasn't a single moment. It was a decision I had to make every single morning, the decision to get out of bed, the decision to forgive, not him, not yet, but to forgive times myself, times for not seeing it, for being a fool, as I'd called myself. I had to learn that his cruelty was not my failure as a mother. It was his failure as a human being. The process of completely detoxifying from the mercury was slow and painful. I spent almost 2 months in the regional hospital receiving intensive treatment. The doctors shook their heads, impressed not only by the amount of poison in my system, but by the fact that I had survived and maintained enough lucidity to mount a plan and collect evidence. "You are a scientific miracle, ma'am," the neurologist handling my case would say. And I always replied, "It's not a miracle, doctor. It's knowledge. Knowledge and a whole lot of old-fashioned stubbornness." The hospital treatment was aggressive, powerful, intravenous chelators that left my body sore and nauseous, but were necessary to break the bonds the mercury had formed with the proteins in my tissues and allow my kidneys to flush the metal out. IV drips, vitamins, physical therapy, occupational therapy, to regain the fine motor skills in my hands, and every week, new tests to see if the levels were dropping. When I was finally discharged, I still wasn't the same. I never would be again. Mercury leaves permanent marks when it reaches certain levels in the body. I was left with a slight tremor in my hands, which appears mainly when I'm tired or nervous. Every now and then, I get stuck in the middle of a sentence, searching for a word I know, but that slips away like a fish through my fingers. My motor coordination never fully returned to what it was. I have to concentrate more to do delicate work, like sewing or writing by hand. But considering what could have happened, death or permanent, severe brain damage, these lingering effects are a small price to pay. And more important than the physical recovery was regaining my independence. I moved back into my own house, not the same one where it all happened. I sold that one as soon as I could. It held too many memories. I regained control of my life, my finances, my decisions. The hardest part was the grief. Not the conventional grief for the loss of a son to prison, although that was painful too, but the deeper, more complex grief for the realization that I had lost my son long before, perhaps without ever noticing. I lost him to greed, to coldness, to that moral void that allowed him to poison his own mother day after day, watch her waste away, and still continue. In the darkest nights, I would ask myself when it happened. As a boy, a teenager, an adult? Was it something that was always there, a character flaw I failed to see? Or did it develop slowly, like a silent disease that only shows symptoms when it's already too advanced? And the question that tormented me most, was it my fault? Did I go wrong in his upbringing? Did I spoil him too much, demand too little? Or did I simply not see the warning signs that, looking back, seemed so obvious? These questions have no easy answers. Maybe they never will, but slowly, I learned to live with them, to accept that I may never fully understand what happened, and that perhaps it's not possible to understand certain human choices. The worst part of the grief was accepting that the son I knew or thought I knew never really existed. He was a persona, a mask that Ryan wore when it was convenient. The real Ryan was a stranger to me, someone I never truly knew, despite having carried him in my womb, nursed him, raised him, But as the saying goes here in the Midwest, you can't cry over spilled milk. I couldn't stay stuck in the past, ruminating on unanswerable questions, drowning in guilt and sorrow. I needed to find a meaning to move forward, a reason to get out of bed every morning, a purpose that justified having survived when everything indicated I should have died. And so, amidst the pain and recovery, I began to transform my personal tragedy into something bigger than myself. The idea came one afternoon when Matthew, my former student pharmacist who had been so crucial to my salvation, came to visit me with disturbing news. Another suspected case of elderly poisoning had appeared in a neighboring town. An 80-year-old woman with neurological symptoms similar to mine. A nephew as the sole heir. A hasty diagnosis of dementia. "How can we identify these cases before it's too late?" he asked, genuinely distressed. "How do we know when it's a natural disease and when it's a crime?" It was as if a light bulb went on in my head, and that's the moment, isn't it? The moment the survivor becomes the advocate. Mrs. Sullivan is about to turn her very specific, painful knowledge into a shield for countless others. Keep listening, because this chemistry teacher's greatest lesson is about to begin. I had been through it. I had survived. I had the scientific knowledge and the personal experience. Who better than me to develop a method for identifying the systematic poisoning of the elderly? I started with small groups, volunteer classes for pharmacists and nurses in the region, teaching them the warning signs that differentiate symptoms of genuine dementia from heavy metal poisoning. I explained the subtleties, how poisoning tends to have more irregular patterns, with periods of sudden improvement, when the poisoner is absent or reduces the dose, followed by abrupt decline when they return or increase the dose, whereas degenerative diseases usually have a more constant progression. I gave talks to groups of seniors at the church, the community center, in retirement associations. I taught them how to protect their autonomy, what documents never to sign without reading completely or without trustworthy witnesses, how to identify signs of psychological manipulation, how to maintain an independent support network, how to document changes in their own health that seemed suspicious. I worked with Matthew to develop a simple, cheap test kit that could identify the presence of heavy metals in liquid medicines or food. It wasn't as precise as lab tests, but it could serve as a preliminary warning, justifying a more in-depth investigation. We distributed these kits to pharmacies and health clinics and taught community health workers how to use them. What began as a small, local initiative grew organically. Other counties in the region began to invite me to give lectures. A report in a state newspaper drew attention to the work. Soon, we were forming a true protection network for vulnerable seniors, especially in small Midwestern towns where resources are limited and oversight is less. I called this network the Celator Project, a name that had special meaning for me, as chelators had been fundamental to my detoxification. But now the meaning was broader. Just as chelators bind to toxic metals in the blood and remove them from the body, our network would bind to at-risk seniors and help them escape potentially lethal situations. With the project's growth came new opportunities and challenges. We began training formal and informal caregivers to recognize signs of abuse and neglect. Not just poisoning, which is rare, but all the more common and subtle forms of elder abuse. We established partnerships with universities for specific research on forensic toxicology in cases involving the elderly. How to identify poisoning in bodies already buried, for example, or how to differentiate the natural accumulation of certain metals common in seniors who lived in old mining areas, like many here in Missouri, from intentional poisoning. One of the contributions I'm most proud of was developing, in partnership with Detective Scott, who had been crucial in my own story, an investigation protocol for police departments, a step-by-step guide for officers who need to handle reports of elder abuse, especially in cases where poisoning or improper administration of medication is suspected. The protocol has already been adopted by several precincts in Missouri, and there is interest from other states in implementing it as well. While the external work grew, I was also doing my internal work. The hardest part was deciding how to deal with Ryan. Some advised me to cut ties completely, to pretend he had died, to never mention his name again. Others suggested unconditional forgiveness, as if that were possible or even healthy in the face-to-face of such a profound betrayal. I found my own path, the only one that made sense to me. Periodic visits to the penitentiary where he was serving his time, trying to understand what had happened, seeking not justifications, but explanations. The first visits were tense, painful. Ryan alternated between denying everything. It was a conspiracy. Blaming others. I was manipulated by Ashley. And occasionally, when he was in a particularly dark mood, coldly admitting that he would have gotten away with it if it weren't for my unexpected cleverness. There was never a big moment of remorse, a sincere apology, a satisfactory explanation. But over time, in small fragments of conversation, I began to piece things together: the financial pressure, the spiraling debt, the fear of losing the status he had built, the emotional coldness he developed as a defense mechanism in the medical profession, the influence of Ashley and her father, the gradual detachment he felt from me and everything I represented. Simplicity, honesty, hard work without glamour. It didn't justify anything, but it helped form a more complete picture. And it allowed me to see Ryan not as a one-dimensional monster, but as a deeply flawed human being who made terrible, unforgivable choices, but human choices nonetheless. This wasn't to diminish his guilt or lessen the deserved punishment, but so that I could find some peace amidst the chaos. Slowly, I came to accept that I had done what needed to be done, despite the immense pain. That reporting my own son was not betrayal, but justice not just for me, but for other potential victims he would have claimed if he remained free. That true motherly love doesn't mean closing your eyes to evil, but facing the truth, no matter how painful. Parallel to this internal process of acceptance, I was rebuilding my social life. Many friendships that had been cut off during the poisoning period were resumed with renewed strength. My former students, especially those who formed the network that saved me, became almost an adopted family. And speaking of adoption, I gained a constant companion in the form of Buddy, a yellow lab mix I found abandoned on the riverbank during a walk. He was thin, dirty, with an injured paw. I took him home just until I could find him an owner, as I told myself. But of course, I ended up being that owner. He follows me everywhere, sleeps at the foot of my bed, and has a sixth sense for knowing when I'm having a bad day, when the memories of the past weigh too heavily. As the work with the Collator project grew and my recovery progressed, I began to extract lessons from that terrible experience. Lessons that I share in every lecture, every training session, every conversation with worried seniors or well-intentioned family members. The first and most important: knowledge is power, especially in old age. The science I taught my whole life is what saved me when I needed it most. I often say, it wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It was the knowledge accumulated over decades that allowed me to identify what was happening, create a plan, and execute it, even under the most adverse circumstances. Another crucial lesson: knowledge doesn't get old or expire. Sometimes it just lies dormant, waiting. Those lectures on toxicology I gave decades ago, the meticulous notes I took in seemingly forgotten notebooks, the secret code I developed in my youth, all of it seemed irrelevant to my life as a retired teacher until the moment it became literally vital. I often tell the seniors who attend my talks, don't let anyone convince you that your knowledge is obsolete or worthless. What you know might save your life, or someone else's, when you least expect it. I also learned that age may diminish our physical strength, but our minds can become sharper with the years. Not faster, maybe not as agile at learning new things, but wiser, more capable of recognizing patterns, of connecting seemingly unrelated dots, of sensing when something is wrong, even without knowing exactly what. An old person's intuition isn't superstition, it's condensed experience, I like to say. And finally, the lesson that always ends my lectures: never underestimate an old teacher. We know more than we let on. Ryan made that fatal mistake. He saw only a frail, easily manipulated elderly woman, when in reality he was dealing with a mind trained for decades in meticulous observation, precise documentation, and careful analysis. It's a reminder not just for potential criminals, but for society as a whole, which tends to infantilize the elderly and disregard their intellectual capacity. Today, at 76, I continue to live independently in Hannibal, in the new house I bought after selling the old one, which held too many memories, both good and terrible. It's a smaller house, easier to maintain, with a spacious yard where I grow not only flowers but also some of the medicinal herbs that aided in my detoxification. Buddy, my faithful dog, keeps me company and ensures there's no shortage of noise and movement in the house after so much imposed silence. In addition to the ongoing work with the Kelator project, I'm writing a book documenting my experience and methods, not to position myself as a victim or a hero, but to leave a detailed record that can help others, both potential victims and professionals who work with the elderly. A practical guide to self-defense for the golden years, based not on abstract theories, but on lived experience and solid scientific knowledge. The work on elder protection has gained national recognition in recent years. I've been invited to speak at geriatrics conferences, participate in public hearings on policies for seniors, and contribute my experience to the development of new healthcare protocols. It's strange, and a bit ironic, that such a painful personal tragedy has opened doors for work that now positively affects the lives of thousands of seniors across the country. I won't lie and say there aren't hard days. Mornings when I wake up and, for a second, forget everything that happened, expecting the phone to ring with Ryan on the other end, asking how I slept. There are nights when the nightmares return. The metallic taste in my mouth, the uncontrollable tremors, the feeling of being trapped in a body that no longer responds to commands. There are moments when I look at old photographs, Ryan as a child, smiling with missing teeth, hugging me and his father, and I wonder where that little boy went, at what moment he got lost. But there are also many new joys, a renewed purpose, a sense of making a real difference in the world, the gratitude for each extra day I'm given, which I very nearly didn't have, the freedom of someone who has faced the worst that can happen and survived, of someone who has nothing left to lose, and, for that very reason, can be more authentic, more direct, more truthful. As a saying from the Missouri Ozarks goes, which my father used to repeat, "He who has already crossed the flooded river isn't afraid of the creek." I've already faced the most dangerous flood I could imagine. Whatever comes next, I'm ready. Today, I sit on the porch, watching Sarah's little daughter, Lily, intently observing a dewdrop on a leaf, just as I was once fascinated by that drop of mercury long ago. "Grandma Margaret, why is it round?" she asks. I insist they call me Grandma. Beside her, her brother David carefully records his observations in a small notebook, exactly as I used to do. I may have lost the son I gave birth to, but I gained a family that actually values life. Ryan once used knowledge to conceal the truth, to destroy. Now, this new generation, my chosen family, uses that same curiosity to explore the world. History has repeated itself, but in a better way. The circle has finally closed, and I feel a complete sense of peace. Stories like this deserve to be shared. If you also believe in the power of truth, please subscribe to the channel to help me spread even more.